Our business is built around the love of brewing beer at home, and one ingredient is the heart of that, and it's malt.
I'm James and this is Martin, and we're here today at Malt Miller HQ to talk to you about our favourite ingredient, and that's malt, aren't we, Martin?
Yeah, now, like a lot of people, when I started homebrewing, it was all about hops. And
Yeah.
That's kind of what got me into it. And like so many of us, we just overlook malt, but malt is the heart and the core of every recipe and beer we brew.
Exactly, and the selection of your malt can make a huge difference in the finished product, right?
The selection and the quality of your malt is really, really key. And that's what we do best here at the Malt Miller. We have a huge selection of over 160 different malts from various maltsters around the world. And then we treat it the best way we can possibly to give our customers the best ingredient to brew with.
So Martin, to kickstart us, for anybody at home that's landed on this video and doesn't already know, what is malt?
Right, well, let's keep it simple. Malt is basically a grain. It's barley that's grown in a field, so it's a natural product. It then goes to a maltster, which is a manufacturing place where they will basically take that malt, which has to meet a certain specification in terms of size, moisture content, and they will then do a number of different steps to it. So they'll false germinate it, which means they'll wet it, and they'll turn it until the little seed starts to grow, and then what they'll do is they'll stop it, and then they'll do a series of different processes. It could be roasting it, it could be caramelizing it, which gives it flavors and color, and that's what really helps us start building different flavors into our beer with the malt.
And that's the really exciting part, isn't it? How you can go from 1, 2, 3, 4 varieties of barley that are grown by a farmer, which go through different processes and end up as different products at the end, different types of malt at the end, whether it's something like an amber malt or a caramel or a crystal malt. All of it just goes through slightly different processes to end up as that finished product that we then brew with. Now, malt can be broken down into 5 or 6 different categories, okay? And those different categories, as we've said, play different roles within your recipe building, starting with base malt. Now, base malt really is like the building blocks for every beer recipe. It's what brings the fermentable sugars to your beer once it's been through the mashing process. And it adds all of those sugars that the yeast loves to chow down on and turn into alcohol. It's not so much about bringing loads and loads of big, bold flavours. That's for the other categories.
So then you've got your caramels, which is almost like a sticky toffee, depending on the level of the caramelization in there. And then your next step after that, you've kind of got your roasted malts, which is like your coffee malts, like you love your coffee.
Yep. And
it's adding that dry roastiness to the flavour of the beer.
And dark colour as well, which
Yeah.
you'll find in stouts and porters and, you know, black IPAs. That's all brought from those roasted malts, right?
Yeah, and then you get this other category, which is like a speciality malt, which is kind of a little bit more bizarre and a little bit more kind of sitting in between the two of them. It can be in some categories and some of the products there. And then the final one will be adjuncts, which is things which aren't barley, but you're still going to use as a grain within your brew.
Yeah, and that could be things like wheat or oats or rice or maize.
Yeah.
There's a long list of adjuncts, and their roles again play out differently within different recipes.
And then when you're actually looking at your malts, you'll see in a recipe, the main thing that you need to be looking for here in the UK is what we call EBC.
EBC is like a colour scale, isn't
Yeah,
it? That
yeah.
indicates from light to dark, a low number being light, a high number being dark, the level of colour within your malt.
Yeah, so you'll find a base malt, like an extra light base malt could be anywhere about 1.5 to 3, and then you'll start looking at higher up as you go through the scale, up to into the hundreds when you're looking at those roast malts that you love.
Exactly. So Martin, for the viewers at home, tell us, where do we get our malts from here at the Malt Miller?
So here at the Malt Miller, we work with exactly the same maltsters as all of the professional breweries out there. We contract malt with some of those maltsters as well to ensure we have enough supply for the year. And we work with them to work with their lead times, because they all have different lengths of time from us ordering to delivery.
Yep.
And we work very closely with all of them by visiting them visiting us. And we work with Crisp, Simpsons, Fireman in Germany, Dingmans in Belgium, some of the classic English ones, Fawcett's and Warminster. You know, every maltster that has something unique and special to offer, we try to ensure that we have it in our range. So you've got this almost vast palette of every kind of colour and flavour and taste that you need to create every beer recipe.
And even some of those really special and unique malts, like smoked malt, for example.
Yeah.
You know, if you want to make a smoky lager or stout, then we'll have a malt that you can use for that exact purpose.
Yeah, and it's not just also then doing that. We also smoke in-house. So we supply a lot of UK breweries with specialist smoked malts, which we will smoke over cherry or we'll smoke over applewood, just to give them something special and unique. And again, that's something we can do if you want to have a sack of it as well. So James, recently you've just been out and visited a couple of our maltsters. Tell us about those visits and what you see there.
Yeah, definitely, Martin. One thing that's really important for us is having strong relationships with our suppliers. First and foremost, we want to understand the product that they are producing, the standards of which that product is being produced, and also some of the challenges that might be being faced by the producers as well. You know, if we talk about malt specifically, actually here in the UK, we've had a really long, dry summer. Now, you might think that's caused challenges for maltsters. Actually, that's not the case. We've had a really good crop this year. What it has impacted is the size of the grain, which we then have to consider when we get new batches of malt in, because we have to adjust our malt mills because we're dealing with either bigger or smaller grains that are going through our mills.
Yeah, it's a natural product, and that's easy to forget because we just think of it as another piece in the jigsaw in the machine of making beer. But it is actually a natural product grown in a field by a farmer, susceptible to weather and climate.
Now, for anybody that's shopped with the malt miller before, you'll know that we place a huge amount of care into preparing your orders. Malt is absolutely at the heart of that. Now, Martin, do you want to tell us a little bit about the process that happens to malt from the moment it arrives here from one of our suppliers to when it leaves in a bag for a customer?
Okay, so when malt arrives here, the one thing that is always done, it's always delivered whole. We're one of the few suppliers in the UK that has whole, uncrushed malt. That means we can store it on the shelf, in the bags, and it stays fresh. It remains as it was when it left the maltster. When a customer orders it, their order is a totally bespoke, unique order, because they can order it from 50 grams up to 25 kilos and beyond.
Yep.
You know, there's no limit on what we sell and how we sell it. We will sell it exactly the way somebody wants to buy it. So, customer places an order for their 5 kilos of malt. Our system prints off a label, it goes on the bag, that bag goes into the malt room. The millers in the malt room have 4 mills. Now, those are doing different jobs throughout the morning when these orders are taken off, but in all senses, they're actually processing everyone's individual bespoke order, and they're all processed in EBC colour. So we always go from light to dark, so that ensures there's no cross-contamination. So the mills are just constantly progressing through. The miller then selects the malt the customer has ordered, by the weight they have ordered, weigh it out, goes into the mill is set to the specific crush type for that malt, and it's then put back into the bag on the bottom of the mill. That then goes outside and it goes through our brand new heat sealer, which ensures the bag stays nice and firmly closed, and then that bag heads back to the customer's picking bin and goes into their bin, so that then the packer of the order places their malt into the box, and that order then gets shipped directly to the customer. So all in all, it's crushed totally fresh on that day for that customer, if they want it crushed, because we also sell it uncrushed to the customer, so you can mill it at home. And we also do fine crush. So if you're brewing a bag brewer, you can have it fine crush as well. So we do all of that specifically to the customer's request. And then that order goes off to the customer and they can have it basically the next day.
There's no pre-crushed malt here.
No.
It's not going stale and it's not losing any of that wonderful flavour.
The reason we choose to do whole malt instead of crushed malt is it keeps its moisture locked in. So that means the malt stays fresher. The other benefit is that if you were having sacks of crushed malt sitting in the warehouse, that sack will slowly separate out. So the larger particles come to the top and the smaller falls to the bottom. So you almost end up like with flour at the bottom, husk at the top.
Yeah.
So if you were then scooping out that malt, you're not going to get a full mix of the bag.
Yeah, exactly. So when you've ordered a specific amount of malt with us, that malt goes into the mill whole and into your bag in all its component parts.
Yeah. If it's 50 grams, you get 50 grams of whole malt. Or if it's 5 kilos, you get 5 kilos of whole malt. So you get the true mix of what your malt is comprised of.
Yeah.
So James, you touched on this, but as the malt changes with the harvest,
Yep.
we have to reset the mills. How do we go about doing that here?
Well, it's not just with harvest, actually, Martin. Harvest is a big key factor, but also just dependent on different varieties of malt or adjunct. We take everything through a process where we crush a representative amount and we put it into something called a separation box. Now, this separation box has different gauges of mesh inside, and you shake it and turn it for a specific amount of time. What happens is inside that box, the three components separate out. Now, those components are husks, grits, and flour. And what we have to do is make sure that the percentages of each malt is specific within those three sections. And what our millers will do is they will adjust the mill to make sure that we hit the mark on those three areas. Now that means that when you're brewing at home, you get great extraction, not too astringent flavours coming from the husks, and you're able to sparge or lauter effectively and end up with well extracted, really good, bright work going into your fermenter. Now, we've talked a lot about how we handle malt here at the Malt Miller. One thing we haven't talked about a huge amount so far is when it comes to handling malt that goes into a recipe. Now, we have hundreds of recipe kits available on our website, loads of different styles. They've either been built by us, our team, professional brewers that we know, or in some cases by our customers. Now, the great thing is that you can create your own recipes at home using our recipe generator, which is on our website. Martin, how do we handle those recipe kits, and how does it differ to maybe when somebody orders 3, 4, 5 kilos of one specific malt?
So the recipe generator and the recipe kits are handled slightly differently because customers can order from those 160 different malts. So all of those malts could be different sizes, different shapes, and need different milling processes. So on the label, the miller will get instructions of what the malts are, the weights, and they will then go around the malt room selecting each individual malt and crushing them individually into the bag for the customer. This ensures they get the right crush level on each individual malt that we offer through the recipe generator.
And that all goes into 1 or 2 bags, right?
Yeah,
depending on the recipe.
Yeah, depending on the recipe and the size of the recipe, we have bags which are for 3 kilos, 5 kilos, and the system works it all out and tells the miller which ones to put into the bags. It's very clever, and it's very, very specialist.
Yeah.
And the millers, they really take their time and care over the recipes because they know how important they are to our customers.
And all of this means that when it comes to brew day, you haven't got to weigh everything out. You've got 1 bag or 2 bags. You can just cut the corner off, dough in, and away you go.
Yeah.
Now, all of this should convey to you the level of care we put into preparing any order that contains malt. We really care about it here at the Malt Miller, and it's what we feel makes us different.
Don't forget, like the video, subscribe, and hit the bell for notifications.
And you can always follow us on social media. So that's Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter.